Okay, welcome to the final lecture for tissues. So we left off with muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is highly vascularized. It's responsible for most types of movements. Muscle cells possess myofilaments made up of actin and myosin, proteins that will bring about the actual contraction of the muscle. We'll get into that when we get to the muscular system and subsequently the cardiovascular system. There are three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal muscle is attached to and causes movement of bones. It's also called a voluntary muscle because you actually have conscious control over this muscle, meaning you can decide consciously when you want to move this muscle. The other two types of muscle, cardiac and smooth, you actually have no conscious control over. The cells are called muscle fibers, not muscle cells, because as you'll see when we talk about muscle tissue in chapter, I think it's 9 or 10, I forget off the top of my head, but when we get to muscle tissue, we'll get into this. It's mainly because muscle fibers are actually the combination of multiple cells that have fused together. Okay, so they will appear to have multiple nuclei, and they will also have striations or banding patterns. And here you can see a muscle fiber, and you can see the striations that exist with skeletal muscle here. Cardiac muscle, this is only found in the walls of the heart. It is also an involuntary muscle. Like skeletal muscle, it contains striations, but the cells have only one nucleus. The cells can have many branches that will actually join branches of other cardiac cells. Intercalated discs, these are special joints where cardiac cells are joined together. And the reason why the intercalated discs are there, and again, we'll talk about this when we get to the heart in A&P2, is so that all of the muscle cells actually are in constant, communication as far as ion flow with each other, because you want the whole heart to actually contract as one unit and not contract multiple, cells contracting at multiple different times. So it looks very similar to skeletal muscle, but it's a little more disjointed. It's not as uniform. And what you'll notice is these intercalated discs as well. This was something that you did not see in the skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle, this is found mainly in the walls of hollow organs, other than the heart. The heart is cardiac muscle. This is also an involuntary muscle. There are no visible striations, that's why it's termed smooth. And you have these spindle-shaped cells. Okay, so here we can see you're lacking those striations. It's a much more smoother appearance when you look at this. And again, it's going to be found, for example, in the walls of blood vessels, in the walls of the stomach, in the walls of the intestines. So pretty much in the walls of most of your soft tissue organs. The fourth and final type of tissue is nervous tissue. This is the main component of the nervous system, which consists of the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Nervous tissue will regulate and control body functions. It's made up of two specialized cells, the neurons. These are specialized nerve cells that generate and conduct nerve impulses, and the supporting cells, which will help to support, insulate, and protect the neurons. And here you can see as an example of nervous tissue, where you have the cell body of the neuron and the long extension of the neuron right here. With your neurons, these cells are amitotic, which means they do not undergo mitosis. So these cells sort of need to survive for your entire lifespan. When you start to see degeneration of these neurons, that's when you start to have various neurodegenerative diseases, including things like Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. You can also have things like Parkinson's, MS, things like that. All right, covering and lining membranes. Covering and lining membranes, these are composed of at least two primary tissue types. As most commonly, you're going to find epithelium bound to an underlying connective tissue. There are three types of membranes: cutaneous membranes, mucous membranes, and serous membranes. Cutaneous membranes, this is another name for the skin. There are two layers, the epidermis and dermis. And unlike other membranes, the skin is a dry membrane. We're going to get more into this with actually the next chapter, chapter 5, as this covers the entire integument. So your cutaneous membrane is your skin. Your mucous membranes, you'll see this throughout multiple chapters and multiple organ systems. The mucosa indicates location, not cell composition. This is also called the mucosa. These are going to line body cavities that are open to the exterior, for example, the digestive tract, GI tract, the respiratory tract, and the urogenital tract. These are going to contain moist membranes bathed by secretions, or, for example, other things such as urine. They are epithelial sheets that lie over layers of loose connective tissue called a lamina propria, and these particular types of mucosa may actually secrete mucus as well. So if we think about the GI tract, the GI tract is actually something that's going to start with the oral cavity, continue down the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small and large intestines, and then the anorectal canal. That is one continuous tube from the oral cavity to the anus, and the entire lumen of that tube is technically considered outside body. It's an outside surface, even though I know it's physically inside of you. And those surface areas are precisely that. They are surface areas that line the entire tract. The best example I can give you to think about this is think of a donut. If you think of a donut, how you have the hole going through the middle, okay? And if you think about the lining of the hole going through the middle of the donut, it's the same as the exterior surface. It's just part of the outer surface, and that's what your GI tract pretty much consists of. Okay, mucous membranes. The serous membranes, or serosa. This is found in closed ventral body cavities. It's constructed from simple squamous epithelium called mesothelium, resting on a thin areolar connective tissue platform. This consists of two layers, the parietal serosa, which lines the internal body cavities, and the visceral serosa, which covers the actual organs themselves. Typically, what you'll see between the two layers, the parietal and visceral serosa, is filled with a serous fluid, and this is meant to give a friction-free environment. Okay, so I think sort of outlined here in pink would be where you would find these serous membranes. So you have them around the lungs, the heart, most of your abdominal pelvic organs as well. Okay, the final discussion point for today is with tissues is tissue repair. When the body's barriers are compromised, the inflammatory and immune responses are activated, repair starts pretty quickly, and the actual function of repair is part of the inflammatory process. The steps that are involved in tissue repair is that repair can occur in two major ways. One, regeneration. This is when the same kind of tissue replaces destroyed tissue, so original function is restored. The second is fibrosis. This is when connective tissue replaces the destroyed tissue, and the original function is lost, and that's what we would call fibrous tissue, or quote-unquote scar tissue. So the first step of tissue repair is the inflammation sets the stage. And what happens is when you have your damaged cells, they release inflammatory chemicals, which will cause a dilation of blood vessels and an increase in blood vessel permeability. One of the first things that you're going to want to do is actually, stop blood loss, and clotting of blood will occur. So the first step is inflammation sort of sets the stage, okay? And, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw, an open-ended question on the test that says, list and describe the steps of tissue repair. And you know, here you have the steps and a nice little description that I'm sure you can pare down to a sentence or two. The second step is organization restores blood supply. You want to fix that first. Organization begins as the blood clot is replaced with granulation tissue, which is essentially new capillary enriched tissue. Once you have restored blood supply, epithelium begins to regenerate, and any debris that remains will be phagocytized by phagocytic cells. Step 3 is regeneration and fibrosis affect permanent repair. The scab will detach, the fibrous tissue matures, the epithelium thickens. You know, if this was an area that was damaged once, the potential for it being damaged again, you might want to add a little more protection there. The results in a fully regenerated epithelium with underlying scar tissue, which may or may not be visible. Okay, and here you can see we have our damaged tissue fixed. This whitened area, this contains the underlying scar tissue that is sort of filled in there. Okay. Tissues that regenerate extremely well will include your epithelial tissue, bone, areolar connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue, and blood-forming tissues. Tissue with moderate regenerating capacity, this would be smooth muscle and dense regular connective tissue. Tissues that have virtually no functional regenerative capacity, this is cardiac muscle and nervous tissue of the brain and spinal cord. With cardiac muscle, if you have, say, a heart attack and you actually have damaged heart muscle, that heart muscle gets replaced with fibrous tissue, which is non-functional tissue. Nervous tissue and brain, such as damage to the brain, damage to the spinal cord, you know, if you sort of damage that particular tissue, it's done, okay? Those that occur, but let's run away from those. Okay. And that is it for chapter 4 and tissues. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the tissues lectures. The final lecture for the first exam will be the integuments, which is actually a very easy chapter. Hopefully that'll be a breeze for you guys. And then we can start diving into some of the more challenging chapters moving forward. All right, have a good one, guys.